Welcome back to Combat Ufology with Argo. Tonight we covered the sixth pillar, Dr. John Mack. John Edward Mack was born October 4th, 1929, and passed away in September 27th, 2004. He was an American psychiatrist, writer, and professor of psychiatry. He served as the head of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School from 1977 to 2004. In 1977, Mack won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, A Prince of Our Disorder, on T. E. Lawrence. Mack's clinical expertise was in child psychology, adolescent psychology, and the psychology of religion. He was also known as a leading researcher on the psychology of teenage suicide and drug addiction, and he later became a researcher in the psychology of alien abduction experiences. In the early 1990s, Mack commenced a decade-plus psychological study of 200 men and women who reported recurrent alien encounter experiences. Such encounters had seen some limited attention from academic figures like R. Leo Sprinkle, perhaps being the earliest in the 1960s. Mack, however, remains probably the most esteemed academic to have studied the subject. He initially suspected that such persons were suffering from mental illness, but when no obvious pathologies were present in the persons he interviewed, his interest was piqued. Following encouragement from longtime friend Thomas Kuhn, who predicted that the subject might be controversial, but urged Mack to collect data and ignore prevailing materialist, dualist, and either-or analyses. Mack began concerted study and interviews. Many of those he interviewed reported that their encounters had affected the way they regarded the world, including producing a heightened sense of spirituality and environmental concern. Mack was somewhat more guarded in his investigations and interpretations of the alien abduction phenomenon than were earlier researchers. Literature professor Terry Matheson writes that, on balance, Mack does present a fair-minded an account as has been encountered to date, at least as the abduction narrative goes. In a 1994 interview, Jerry Mishlove stated that Mack seemed inclined to take these abduction reports at face value. Mack replied by saying, "Face value, I wouldn't say. I take them seriously. I don't have a way to account for them." In 1996 interview with PBS, he stated, "There are aspects of this which I believe we are justified in taking quite literally. That is, UFOs are in fact observed, filmed on camera, at the same time that the people are having their abduction experiences. It's both literally, physically happening to a degree, and it is also some kind of psychological, spiritual experience occurring and originating perhaps in another dimension." On Monday, September 27th, 2004, while in London to lecture at a T. E. Lawrence Society-sponsored conference, Mack was killed by a drunk driver heading west on Totteridge Lane. He was walking home alone after a dinner with friends when he was struck at 11:25 p.m. near the junction of Totteridge Lane and Longland Drive. He lost consciousness at the scene of the crash and was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. The driver, Raymond Chakowski, an IT manager, was arrested at the scene and later entered a plea of guilty to careless driving while under the influence of alcohol. Mack's family requested leniency for the driver in a letter to the Wood Green Crown Court. "Although this was a tragic event for our family," the letter reads, "we feel the accused's behavior was neither malice nor intentional, and we have no ill will toward him since we learned of the circumstances of the collision. The driver, Ray Chakowski, served 6 months and was disqualified from driving for 3 years. Here are the works of Dr. John Mack. Passport to the Cosmos, Human Transformation and Alien Encounters, 1999. Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, 1994. A Prince of Our Disorder, The Life of T.E. Lawrence, 1976. Nightmares and Human Conflict, 1970. So, Argo, tell us why Dr. John E. Mack constitutes the sixth pillar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Combat Ufology with Argo. Today we're going to cover the sixth pillar. Handsome guy named John Mack, Dr. John Mack. Was a clinician at Harvard. Won the Nobel Prize. He won the Nobel Prize for his book about Lawrence of Arabia. If anybody even knows who Lawrence of Arabia was. It's a World War II kind of hero, anti-hero. And won the Nobel Prize for it. John knew Bud Hopkins and Dave Jacobs, Carla Turner, all the others that were around at the time. And John took on some patients because he could see that something was legitimately going on with people, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. One of the greatest minds ever to do it. And John wrote a couple of books. I read them all. And I really enjoyed John. He was very optimistic. And when you read his books are absolutely full of optimism. And as annoying as that is now, some years later, knowing what I know about the subject, John was the optimist. John was ever the optimist, and highly intelligent guy who wanted to give aliens the benefit of the doubt because we don't properly understand their sociology. You'll recognize that from the last pillar. So John wrote his books in the vein of optimism. And I can remember when I was in my young 20s, when the alien autopsy came out, I had to have a copy. Absolutely had to have a copy. So I bought it on video, and it was around that time that John's book came out. And, I just can't even tell you how that video made people feel who would watch it, who were interested in the subject at the time. And John, I can remember at the time, although it's part of a movie now, I can remember at the time I was so on top of the subject, needless to say, that I remember when John went to Africa and dealt with the kids who saw the aliens in Africa. And what good work he did there. What great work he did there. John, now looking back, I can see that John was a very big threat to the establishment in so many ways, because John was trying to instill optimism in this at a time, and I can tell you the 90s were the peak of ufology. We've gone backwards since then, and we have something we've never had before, and that is the United States military government releasing gun camera footage from weapons of death to show you the real. Something that would have absolutely never happened in the 90s. As a matter of fact, the government was so knee-jerk, scared to death of what these different pillars that I've been telling you about were doing in the 90s that they released a new press release on Roswell. It was like Roswell, 40 years later, or 50 years later, or whatever lies we want to tell. And they once again backed that crap. That's because in the 90s this was a very strong subject, and John Mack was one of the absolute leaders from the front. Being such a leader in academia, it was natural that he should take the intelligent front and begin to disseminate truth. And he did so. And he may have paid with his life for it. John was in England doing a conference. And in a country that we all know has, let's say a hamlet of 1,000 people has 200 cameras. Who knows how many are in London? like, 40,000 cameras? In a country where every street's watched. John was killed by a hit-and-run driver who was never caught. Whoops. No more Harvard mind leading the way. Got Carla out of the way. She was putting the proper fear into people about this subject. Who knows? Maybe life just gave her cancer. I know the aliens didn't save her, and I know mankind couldn't. And John was run down without a killer being caught. John did good work in Africa, and he did good work for us. Once again, all of his books written in the 90s. You have to read these materials if you want to understand what I'm talking about. John Mack constitutes sixth pillar because John Mack unabashedly and unapologetically used all his powers of academia to promote the idea that real people are having real abduction experiences with real creatures from another civilization. Not that there are 50 different species living out there all oppressing man for 10 million years, just that there's one set of aliens out there abducting human beings and doing what they want to do with us. 60 to 65% of all abductees are female. So ladies out there listening to me, if you're an abductee, you know the intrusions I'm speaking of, because it's your body that they covet the most. It's your body that they do the most work on. John Mack tried to give us a better view, give us some optimism and lead from the front. John was cut down out of life from the leading from the front. John constitutes the sixth pillar because he was an optimist, and he wanted to see that things could be different than what they seem to maybe be. John constitutes the sixth pillar for the biggest reason, because he was a voice in academia who decided that this was definitely real and to lead from the front. And he did so all the way to his death. An honorable man doing honorable things and has honorably earned the sixth pillar of 7. So if you want to see what John said in optimism about the alien contact experience, you'll have to read his books. And let me tell you, one of them is a dictionary. And it's got a lot in it. But if you've read everything that I have given you to read before this point, and you read John Mack, I'm sure you will feel the same way I did. Rather pessimistic about his optimistic view. Rather rubbed by it. But John wanted to be optimistic, and he was. So study John Mack, because the next pillar is Dr. David Jacobs. And he is the 7th pillar and final pillar that will bring you up to date as to what's happening in the alien contact event with mankind. And then they aren't contacting us. Don't mistake what I say. I'm not saying that they are contacting us, because they've had contact with us for at least tens of thousands of years. They are in contact with us like a leech makes contact with your leg, or the way a vampire bat slips up to your sleeping bag in the middle of the night in South America and lays open a wrist and drinks from you. It's a parasitic nature. So thank you for being here with me on Combat Ufology with Argo. Dr. John Mack, leader, academic champion. I hope you've enjoyed the previous 6 pillars, because we're winding it up with 7th pillar next show, and it's going to be a doozy. It won't be a 30-minute show. It'll be an hour to 2 hours. There's so much information I need to catch you up on, because you'll have to understand all these pillars are dead, except for Whitley Strieber and Dave Jacobs. All the rest are dead. And as I explained in Whitley's pillar, we can't trust what Whitley says past communion. Why? Because he doesn't use the one tool, the only tool that mankind has against the lies and complete blanking of a person's mind of an event. And that is the tool of regression. And Dave Jacobs is a master at it. So was John Mack. So until next time, in Pillar 7, be safe. Watch the skies. And read the information that I've given you to read if you want to know the truth. This is Argo. Until next time, I'm out.